Hi everyone, this is Deborah Pruitt, and it's our College and Career Transition TA call. So I'm glad you're here. I'm going to just give the folks another minute or two to come online, and then we'll get started. So hello everyone, this is Deborah, and I'm glad you're here. This is our College and Career Transition TA call, and I'm here from John Burton Advocates, and Aaron Cobb from Reedley College is here. I'm going to do a couple of announcements, and then the format for today is that we'll talk a bit, and Aaron's going to provide some college point of view on the matriculation process, and then we'll be open for questions and discussion. So one technical thing is to remind you that on your control panel, that then you see a hand there. You can raise your hand if you want to ask a question at any time. And we're using the webinar format because it's so helpful for sharing slides and providing information. But, I really want you all to feel free to talk, raise questions, but also share your experience and information with each other. So don't be shy to raise your hand. I will call on you right now. Everyone is muted, so we don't have a lot of background noise. But I will call on anyone who raises a question or raises your hand, excuse me. And then also there's a tab there to type in your question, and feel free to do that, and we'll address them that way as well. And we will post this webinar, the recording and the slides on the FASTIP challenge, on our website on jbaforyouth.org under Training Archives. So just a couple of quick announcements that our next FASTIP Challenge TA call is April 8th. Congratulations to you all for being on board, for getting your reports in. It's really great to see what's happening with this. So many students are getting served and getting financial aid and getting excited about going to college. And this is just huge. And we're going to have some fun announcing the outcomes and the first round of county awards at the Foster Ed Youth Summit Education, Foster Youth Education Summit in Pomona on April 9th. That's the dates wrong. I'm sorry, y'all. The next TA call is April 6th. Mark through 8th and put April 6th there because we're going to be in Pomona for the Ed Summit on April 9th and 10th, okay? And I'll send you an email like I did this time to register for that TA call on April 6th. Sorry about that error. And then also, we're holding our statewide college and career transition workshop for you all on May 30th. It'll be in Oakland, 9:30 to 3:30. Hopefully you got a save the date email, but I will be sending out an email today, tomorrow, with all the registration details and venue details and so forth. So it'll be great to see you there. I'm working on some good speakers, and I think an agenda that you're going to really appreciate. Bringing in some folks that I think can really help with devising transition plans for all youth. So today we're going to spend the first part of the call talking about matriculation, and I'm so happy to have Aaron Cobb here. He's the NextUp Program Counselor Coordinator at Reedley College in the Central Valley. Aaron's one of our great friends and collaborators. and he's so dedicated. He's on his spring break, but he's on this call this morning because he wanted to be here for you all and for us. And so deep gratitude to Aaron, and I know that you will enjoy hearing his point of view and his tips from a college perspective. I'm going to touch on a couple things before I turn it over to him. So the matriculation process is all about sort of entering into college and getting set up. So it starts, of course, with application. And to remind you, a lot of these are things you may know, but some are things that are worth repeating, and they may be helpful in sort of thinking systematically about the procedure. It's sort of like now that the FAFSA is completed, or soon will be, you know, we need to quickly be working on the next steps. So the application to the college, you know, the deadline will vary school to school, so be sure and help the student make sure they know the deadline for application. And particularly if you're looking at different four-year schools versus two-year schools and so forth, or schools from out of the area. And start the process early. The earlier you start, the more time there is to gather all the information that's needed. You know, a lot of colleges and universities, it can be difficult to find the information that you need on the website. So just remember, it might be necessary to call or visit. And I'm hoping that county folks will certainly have those relationships with the colleges, and you can help your district folks understand those relationships and who the key people are to get information from and to connect students with. And then that's the next line here, is get connected to the FYSI Foster Youth Liaison. Every community college has an FYSI Foster Youth Services Initiative Liaison, and or many, and soon to be most of the campuses have a Foster Youth Campus Support Program that's specifically designed to support them. The FYSI Liaison, maybe they're often in a financial aid department, but not always. It may also be a campus support person. There might be an EOPS, another campus support program. But they have a job that responds to other students, all students, and to other needs. And so they've basically volunteered to be the Foster Youth Service Liaison. So you might need to find where they are. And as opposed to finding a campus support program that's focused strictly on foster youth. And at the end of this presentation, I'll show you the screenshot of our website to remind you that you can easily find who those people are on our California College Pathways website. And if there is a foster youth counselor on campus, there's a special foster youth program, always start there and work with those counselors. If not, almost all foster youth qualify for EOPS at the community college. And Aaron's going to talk a minute about what that really is and what that offers. And so that is the next place to go for counseling, because they're more attentive and more alert to the kinds of issues that the foster youth students have and that they need support with. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron. Aaron, talk a minute about our orientation and anything that he thinks is important to appreciate for what helps students get oriented. All colleges require an orientation as the first step of the matriculation process, and it can vary, but it does have to be accomplished. So I'm going to let Aaron say a few things on this slide. Hi, Aaron. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, you know, unfortunately, for some reason, it's quite an arduous process to get an application into a community college. There's a lot of little hoops you got to jump through. So like Deborah said, it is really important to start early. Here in Fresno County, our county office of ed starts with their seniors and our district liaisons in the fall, the year before, the fall of their senior year, the year before they're going to go to community college, just to get all these different steps out of the way. But I would say the orientation, yes, it's a box we have to check, but we put a lot of time, the colleges put a lot of time into the orientation to make students get all the information that they need. So if you're able to do this with the student, it takes in our college, I think probably on average it's going to take a student about 45 minutes. There's a lot of really good information there. So I think if nothing else, at least let your seniors know to really make sure that when they sit down to do this, that they are giving it their attention for that 45 minutes to an hour, because the information that's covered there is going to keep coming up, and it's going to be important for them to know as they go through the matriculation process. Some high schools, they get all their students together in a cafeteria or an auditorium, and they do a big orientation, and other high schools sit down with students just like in a computer lab on a one-on-one basis. So yeah, colleges do it either way, but there is really important information there. And getting the orientation done is an important step in getting the students ready for priority registration, which we're going to talk a little bit later on in the webinar about. But I do have a lot of students who are ready to register, but they haven't done the orientation, and that can delay things a couple of days because they've got to go back, complete the orientation, and then the admissions and records office would have to clear that hold in order to kind of clear the way for them to register. So it is a really important part of the whole process of getting your seniors ready.
That's really helpful to know. Good to know that there's useful information, and then it's important to do it and do it as early as possible. And then if I can just say, the last point on this slide is take advantage of the Summer Bridge program if there is one. And it might not be called Summer Bridge. It is in the CSU system, but some community colleges also have special sort of summer transition programs and or a first-year experience sort of program where some of the colleges create cohorts of first-year students, and they take them through a couple of standard courses while they also take their other electives, and they really provide a lot of extra support around them. So especially if there's not a really supportive foster youth program, those kinds of things are really important. I'd say they're important for anyone or always, but definitely look for what's available at the colleges that your youth tend to look into. Anything else on that one, Aaron, or shall I go?
No, that's a really good point. I would just, like, if you're on the webinar and you're taking notes, some keywords that you can say when you call the community college, first year experience, or any kind of cohorts, you definitely want to ask about that, because they'll pair students like an English or a math class along with a counseling class, and students will go through as a cohort a couple semesters of classes, and it can really give them a leg up on their English and math. And it helps with all students, but it can especially help with our foster youth students. So I would say just throw out those keywords. Do you have any first year experience programs? And then the college staff will know who to put you in touch with, so you can get more information about that.
Yeah, and it builds up community, puts them into a community, which can be really, really helpful. I'm going to say a couple things about assessment before I turn it back to Aaron. So we've talked some about this in the FYSCP meetings, and we'll continue to talk about it a lot. Things have shifted a bit because of a bill that was passed last year, AB 705. So just to start with a basic point, assessment tests have traditionally been used at all the community colleges to determine where to place students in math and English, and I should add here ESL classes. And so they're a basic assessment, and if they don't perform at a certain level, a certain cutoff point, then they're placed in what are called basic skills or remedial or developmental courses. All those words are basically about the same thing. Bringing the student up to a college level course and preparing for transfer credit course. What has happened is nationally, not just in California, but a lot of research has been done on how effective those assessment tests are at predicting students' ability to succeed in college level work. And it's been shown that they do a poor job of that. So a law was passed last year, AB 705, that now requires all the community colleges to use high school transcript data, high school, I'll just say transcript information for placing the students. They may still have an assessment test. Some don't now, but they, by law, have to use high school information to determine the student's capability of succeeding in a transfer level course. I'll go into more information about this at our statewide meeting on May 30th, but there was just last week a letter out from the chancellor of the community college system to direct the colleges how to proceed implementing this. And it's very clear instruction that a student is not to be placed below a transfer course unless there's clear evidence that they would not likely succeed in that course. So that's important information to know about the sort of high stakes that are involved with assessment tests, and can lead to some thoughts about how to approach them. And here's just a simple piece of information about what happens to students when they get placed very low down in the remedial chain. So at some schools, there are 3 courses of 3, even 4 math remedial classes before students would get to a transfer level course. Depending on their placement on the assessment test, they might get placed 3 or 4 levels down. That's where students we lose students. They start dropping out. And think about the timing. That means 2 to 3 years more of college before you've even taken a transfer math course. So there's a big burden in that. So, and it's important to note that this is where most of the equity gap occurs, because Latino and African American students are much more likely to be placed in several levels down in the remedial chain, and then that's where they tend to drift out. It's discouraging. It feels like sometimes it's too basic for them, and you know, they know they're not taking college level classes, and so after 1 or 2 of those, you know, can seem not worth it because it's an impossible hurdle to overcome. What we now know is that students being placed there does not necessarily reflect their ability to perform at a higher level, or their inability to perform at a higher level. So the push is on to find ways to help students place higher, to reflect their actual ability, not place them above their ability. That's a really important thing to realize. And secondly, to create a learning environment, if they do need some developmental time to catch up, that there's a learning environment and a pedagogy that actually means they can do that in as short amount of time as possible. So a couple things to make sure all students understand to avoid getting stuck in what Cuyamaca College in San Diego region calls the black hole of remediation, and they're one of the leaders in reforming this whole process. And that is prepare for the assessment test. If you haven't taken one online, do it, and find out how hard it can be to remember those things you learned in a math class that you took several years ago or a long time ago. But at any rate, they need to understand what a high-stakes situation it is, and that they should come rested and having eaten a meal and maybe reviewed, have done some preparation work, and certainly they should be taking math and English in their senior year of high school. Find out what the school assessment process is. There's a lot of reform going on in this area, so the landscape is changing and changing fairly quickly. I think we're going to see a lot of changes this year. I already have heard about a number of schools that are starting to implement what's called multiple measures assessment. They're coming online fairly quickly, which is great news. It means a more holistic look at the student's ability to proceed into a transfer course. So get familiar with what's going on at colleges where your students might be going. And then if they are in an assessment test situation or whatever their placement might be, find out if a retake of that test is possible or when it's possible. Sometimes they have to wait a semester. Sometimes they might be able to do it sooner. And also find out what the appeal process is for that placement. It usually involves minimally talking to a department chair and saying, I think I've been placed below my level. Can we talk about this? It might involve a dean So those are just some ideas, but find out what it is at that college, and that may mean some self-advocacy. And encourage taking math and English in their senior year. You know, keep students on that track as much as possible. And then the question beyond the assessment is, if you are placed in some kind of developmental or remedial course, the last point here is encourage the youth to enroll in co-requisite or accelerated remedial tracks if they're available. That means that they might be taking a support level developmental course along with a transfer level course. So they are getting the extra support that they need while they're actually earning transfer credit. It's a huge boost to a lot of students. Or there are accelerated remedial tracks, so that what was a 2 or 3 year sequence might be 1 year now. Again, because the classroom environment has changed, the way the course material is taught has changed, and they get extra support. So it's a changing landscape, but it's moving in an exciting direction, and it takes really connecting and finding out what's going on. So the ultimate message is don't be afraid to accelerate. A lot of students feel insecure, especially if they change schools. They don't feel strong in math, you know, whatever their past experiences have been, and there can be a tendency to kind of want to go slow, but slow often means not finishing. So we know that every remedial course a student takes reduces their likelihood of completing a degree or a certificate. So all the data show that even if a student feels like they're not good in a certain subject or they don't feel confident with it, if they get into the proper learning environment at an accelerated pace, they do much better if they avoid taking remedial classes. So that's a quick upshot of that. There are, again, I can't stress enough about how much the environment, this whole area is changing, and so how much it will vary from one school to another. So it takes a little bit of research and self-advocacy to make sure they're placed as well as possible, and then they get the support that's needed, and that's where the foster youth program staff and counselors are going to be crucial. Aaron, do you want to add anything to this? On the whole, it's a big subject,
yeah.
But
it is. Well, I just have one quick thought. I think the easiest way our county offices of ed and our district liaisons can help is get an unofficial copy of the student's high school transcripts, get a copy of that to the student, scan it, have it in their email, and then work with the student to get it to the college, because that's the easiest way that our college counselors have to use that multiple measures. If we don't have a high school transcript available to us, then we do look for the placement test. But I know me personally, if I have the transcript, that's the first thing I go to, and I try to place as high as I can based on their cumulative GPA and their English and their math grades. So I think probably the best way that we could all help our foster youth is to make sure they get a copy of their unofficial transcript and have it saved in an email or printed in a folder, multiple copies, so they can give it to every counselor they meet with and kind of help them have easy access to that, so they can do that multiple measure assessment.
Great, that's a great tip. Thanks. Then Aaron, it's up. You're up on an education plan.
Yeah, so this is another part of the matriculation process that we're talking about. And like I said, it is kind of cumbersome. There's a lot of different steps you've got to go through. You know, the orientation is one thing we look at, and then the second part is every student has to have an education plan. A lot of times the community colleges will go out to the high school and meet with all the seniors in like this really rushed registration to go process, and they'll do a student education plan. And that's one way if our foster youth participate in that. That's one way that they can get that done. But we know a lot of times our foster youth have court dates or appointments and they miss things like that. Not having a student education plan will also affect a student's ability to get the priority registration for community college. It's another thing another box we have to check in order for our students to be able to register for their classes. So it'll be important when you're working with your community college contacts, your FYSI or EOPS contact, to have them check to make sure that your student has an education plan. And basically, sometimes it'll be abbreviated, so it'll just be like, here's what they're taking the next 2 semesters. And sometimes it'll be a complete education plan where we lay out everything they need to do for the next 4 to 6 semesters. But this will be something that you'll want to keep on your radar during their senior year to make sure that there's somebody at the college that's either developing this plan with them or is going to meet with them to do this plan, and that the system at the community college recognizes that a plan has been developed or put in place in order for the foster youth to get the priority registration and to be considered fully matriculated.
Can I add something here, Aaron? You know, I'm thinking about what I've heard from another foster youth counselor was, what an opportunity this can be to help students to really define what direction they might want to go in. And I'm sure this is true with you, Aaron, and I know this is what this person was telling me about, how much time they spend with the students, helping them think about what are their interests, what kind of path they might want to go down. And this is why I want to emphasize working with a foster youth counselor or an EOPS counselor and not just a general counselor, because you guys, I know, spend a lot more time with students than a general counselor can. And so you're more likely to get a meaningful ed plan than just the sort of, well, you got to take this many units of this, and this will work in the schedule, so take these classes. And I can't tell you how many students I've had that's the plan that they're on, as opposed to sort of a sense of direction and courses that really make sense. And I know that a lot of youth don't know yet, or they feel kind of confused or uncertain how they want to proceed. So I definitely know of foster youth counselors who really do that counseling, help students figure out what the right plan is. Is that fair to say?
Right. Definitely fair to say, because it's really important that you have somebody that understands some of the challenges that foster youth face when developing that plan. I've had some students come in where their first semester, they were signed up for like transfer level English, transfer level biology, and transfer level math, which is just way too much to try to have really any student do their first semester, much less a foster youth who might also be transitioning to extended foster care or, exiting a foster home of guardianship or something like that. So yeah, the preference would be to have them meet with a foster youth counselor or an EOPS counselor, because they will be much more sensitive to the unique needs of our population. And that plan will be, really important, especially the first couple semesters when they're acclimating to, how different community college is than high school. So yeah, that will be a critical component to them having a successful first year.
Great. Thank you. Next. Slide to go. So go ahead, Aaron, on priority registration.
Yeah, so this is incredibly important. It allows foster youth and a couple other populations like students with disabilities to register for their classes really before anybody else does. So, and I don't know that high school seniors really realize how important this is, but you give them one semester to community college where they've got a Monday night class at 6 to 9 and then a Tuesday morning class at 7 a.m. or something like that. And then they realize, what an advantage it is. But for foster youth, this really comes into play. Getting to register for your classes before anybody else, it gives the foster youth counselor or the EOPS counselor and the student a lot of flexibility to identify the right class, the right instructor, and the right days and times. So if our foster youth have other obligations like court dates or doctor's appointments or anything like that that they need to keep, you can really create a very nice, tight schedule for students to be able to take care of those other needs. Or like, for example, I've got a couple of students who are taking care of siblings and they need to be done with college by 2 so that way they can pick up their siblings from their school and help out their family. And prior to registration, really, we've got a blank slate where you can pick and choose from any of the classes and get a really good schedule. And then most of the times, FYSCP is on campus, or the EOPS counselor will know which instructors are more willing to work with, different populations of students, or which instructors might be a good fit for certain students, and being able to register them in those classes before they get full can really be a great advantage for students. It also avoids the issue of being on a wait list, or trying to, add a class at the last minute, solves a lot of problems with making sure that the student has 12 units for financial aid purposes. It's really a huge advantage, that shouldn't be overlooked.
Well, that's great. It's a real holistic point of view on how important priority registration is. And I'd just like to add that if you do have any youth who might be going to four-year university, even at community college, a lot of classes are very impacted, and so they may not be able to get into a class, and especially if it's a sequence subject where they have to take one course before they can take the next. That could really delay their progress significantly, and it's a really critical issue in the CSU system, the four-year schools as well. So it's crucial. Next, back to you, Aaron.
Yeah, so these are the 4 steps for priority registration, and for all of our other students, it's 3 steps, but that step number 4 is important, that we'll talk about there. So we talked about participate in orientation, and so that could be done in the late fall or spring semester of the student's senior year. Complete the assessment process. We talked about that. That can also be done in the fall or the spring semester of the student's junior or senior year. Developing a student education plan, like we talked about, probably in the spring semester. But this is a really important part, number 4, providing the word of the court letter. And so this is where you'll want to work with the student's social worker to get that letter, and to have it dated with the student's start date when they were in care, and the end date, or if the case is open, have it indicate that the case is open. You want it to be as clear as possible, because most of the staff at admissions and records, they'll assign somebody to deal with this, but they don't know the ins and outs of foster care. So it'd be really important that you work with your FYSI liaison or EOPS counselor. Like we talked about, getting a copy of the transcripts to the student. Make sure you get a scanned copy in the student's email, and get them a couple printed copies in a folder, because they'll be passing out this word of the court letter. But here, for priority registration, you want to make sure that that word of the court letter gets turned into the admissions and records office. They have to go in and code that foster youth as being eligible for priority registration, so they can take advantage of that. There's a few days there, like we said, where they get to register before anybody else does. But if they don't have that word of the court letter, they're not going to code them. And admissions and records is not going to communicate with financial aid and their copy of the word of the court letter, or even with EOPS or anybody like that. Admissions and records, kind of their own thing. So this will be an important part of the step to make sure that they get a copy of the word of the court letter.
I'd like to add a quick point on that, and this may apply more to four-year universities, but it may be some community colleges as well. The communication between financial aid and admissions and records varies some college to college, and in some cases the foster youth program is able to provide the verification to all the departments. Some of the four-year universities have a flag in their system so that once a student is verified one place, any of the relevant departments, usually admissions, actually financial aid, but any of the relevant departments will then have access to that verification. So that is a possibility, but it's not very universal. So Aaron's suggestions about having multiple copies and being alert to making sure that each of the departments is getting it is critical. Thanks. Can you say more? Aaron, do you want to add anything on this point? I think you kind of said it, but.
Yeah, kind of covered it. Yes, it's very important to note that every community college is different. I can, share, and I am coming from the community college perspective, but one other quick note I'll make here is another thing to keep in mind is you know, you do the Chafee grant application with a financial aid application. But again, just because the student is coded for the Chafee grant or eligible for the Chafee grant, it doesn't mean necessarily that admissions and records is hitting that same coding in order to code them as priority registration. So I may have a student who's receiving the Chafee grant, but who is not coded correctly for priority registration. So the most important thing, really, the big takeaway is just, like Deborah said, make sure you've got multiple copies, and just keep in mind that what you do with financial aid may not necessarily be communicated to admissions and records. So you want to be asking, you know, working with your FYSCP liaison on the college campus to ask those questions to make sure that we've got the loop, you know, completed on all the different departments.
That's a great tip. Can you say a few words about the various campus support programs, just generally?
Yeah, you know what, give me, my computer just shut off. So
oh no.
I'm not, yeah.
Okay.
So we're talking about like EOPS and FYSI liaison support.
Yeah,
support
so
on campus.
the slide that has, I think there are a couple of things folks might not know as much about. So if you can sort of mention I'll just ask you, CalWORKs and CARE, what are those?
So you'll have to help me out on CalWORKs because I'm not that familiar with that. So every community college, all 114 of them, they all have an EOPS office. And so I would encourage all the county office of eds and district liaisons to, probably one of the first talking points would be to ask for the FYSI liaison and or the EOPS office, because we know that all the community colleges have the EOPS office. And once you get connected there, you can talk to them. There's a particular eligibility area for foster youth or underrepresented populations within EOPS. So even if there's not like a Guardian Scholars or NextUp program, a foster youth can still participate in EOPS. They provide book vouchers, a couple $100 a semester to pay for books. They provide grants. Some EOPS programs provide meal cards. But another really important component is a foster youth would be able to meet with an EOPS counselor 3 times a semester to get all that guidance that we've been talking about, whereas a general population foster youth would, a general population student would be meeting with a counselor like once a year. So all that additional support can really be helpful. So we know that all community colleges have an EOPS office, and all foster youth, with some very few exceptions, would be eligible to participate in EOPS. So that's a really good place to start. CARE is a program within EOPS, and it's for students who have children and are receiving cash aid. So a lot of times for foster youth, if you're getting extended foster care, you're not eligible for cash aid, so there's not a lot of overlap there. But that's what the CARE program is, and it provides additional grants above and beyond what the student would receive from EOPS. So they would get an EOPS book voucher, and then along with CARE, they would get some additional grants or supplies just to help them out. And that's targeted at students who have children who are going to community college. CalWORKs, unfortunately, I'm not that familiar with, so I can't speak to that program.
I think it's probably enough to say in general, it's a sort of workforce program that helps people get skilled and attain jobs. And so it provides even job search assistance and also support while they're training in college. And it is part of the EOPS program also. And by the way, if you hear EOPS or EOP, generally at the CSUs, they're called EOP programs, and at the community colleges, they're called EOPS. So they're basically the same principle. It's for economically and or academically disadvantaged students and provides the extra support. So especially where there aren't foster youth programs, those are a crucial source of support. Since Aaron can't see the slide, I'm going to say a couple of things that were on this one. To be aware that all campuses have some kind of counseling programs and psychological services, some very robust I know some community colleges that have surprisingly substantial services, some not so much, but always, encourages the student to inquire or know that those are available if the student is in a crisis. Certainly a foster youth program counselor like Aaron is going to be the best place to go first, and then they'll know what other resources there might be. And some of the NextUp programs are able to provide additional psychological counseling support, correct, Aaron? That's still part of what some programs are doing? Great.
Yes, exactly. It's going to vary per program, but yes.
Mm-hmm. And then also food assistance. A lot of the campuses now have pantries and other ways that they help students with cash meal cards and things like that. And again, NextUp programs in particular, or Guardian Scholars programs, often have a very substantial support in that way. And also tutoring. So all the campuses have tutoring programs, and so the students want to get connected with that as early as possible. And also, students that are coming from high school with an IEP certainly can easily connect with the DSPS or the Disabled Students Program, or Student Disability Services. They may be called different names on different campuses, but they will be able to provide the students with any accommodations in terms of physical disabilities, even hearing and sight impairment. I've taught courses with an interpreter, and there are also accommodations for test taking where they can have extra time and so forth. But the student that all has to come from the DSPS office. And if a student doesn't have an IEP, most of the campuses will have someone who can make an assessment, though it can take time, and it's variable how that process will work. So another thing that will vary from campus to campus. Ideally, they come from school with that, high school with that, if they need it. Aaron mentioned the Foster Youth Service Initiative. I did too. So just know that's a resource on campuses where there are no foster youth programs. Remember that the foster youth program can be called different names: Guardian Scholars, Renaissance Scholars. Some campuses have special names, Promise Scholars, or something that's specific to their campus. So don't be thrown by the name. They're all about supporting foster youth, and many of them do a lot of the same things. And the beauty of that is you get an Aaron, or well, hopefully, not everybody. Aaron's kind of a special. He's our special friend. I have to admit. But there are amazing people in those programs that are truly dedicated to the foster youth succeeding at college. And the things you're hearing from Aaron are the kinds of things they're going to help all the students figure out and avoid tripping over or missing their tip. So they are those huge advocates that can help connect with other departments on campus and resources, making it less mysterious and frightening for the student to try to do. They're able to really be sensitive, as you've heard Aaron saying, about the specific needs of foster youth and those individuals in particular. It's a great community experience. They don't feel so isolated and alone, even if they don't want to engage closely. There's still that sense, I'm not the only one here. And of course, offer that special assistance that is available to foster youth because of the recognition that they need more support than students who have parents and providing their college support. So the last slide is just showing you, oh wait, Aaron, did you want to add anything to that before I?
No, I got my computer back up. I would just make a quick comment. Like I mentioned earlier, you talked about disabled students programs and services. If you're working with a foster youth who has an IEP, similarly to the transcripts in the word of the court letter, you can really help the student out a lot if you have them get a copy of that IEP and just scan it in the email for them or put it in a folder. If they can walk into DSPS with a copy of their IEP, that's going to really speed up their ability to get accommodations right away. One of the biggest barriers that students with disabilities face is in high school, everything is mandated and done for them. At the community college, it's a sudden shift to it's entirely the student's responsibility to ask for accommodations. The college will not seek out or identify students with disabilities. They have to go advocate for themselves. And that's a really big shift that students aren't prepared for. So giving them their IEP, taking that IEP into the EOPS office even and saying, I need some accommodations. And they, at Reedley College, and I'm sure at other campuses, they'll refer the students over to DSPS. I walk students over to DSPS to make sure they don't get, lost, or they don't, just head back to the cart, because the accommodations are just absolutely critical to the students, getting off to a good start, like we mentioned. So that's another way that you can really help out if you have a student who has an IEP, is talk to that high school counselor and get a copy of that IEP for the student, and just make sure they're taking it with them with every interaction they're having with their college.
Mm-hmm. And to remind them that it is up to them, through the letter they get from the DSPS office, to communicate with their instructors about the accommodations that they're entitled to. And they won't get them if they don't bring that letter to their instructors. And that can make the difference, can make all the difference. Great. So then, excuse me, just remind you that on our website, you can link to find campus support programs. And so you can find the person, the Aaron, everywhere at every college to talk to about the connections and resources at that campus. So you can search by college, and you can search by geographic region. So if you, if your district liaisons have a student who says, I'm going to go live with my aunt while I go to college, and they're in a different part of the state, go on our website and find who that person is to connect them with, call them on the phone, make the connection so that they are already a step ahead, and it doesn't have to be wandering around uncertain. Anything else, Aaron?
No, that I can think of. I know it's a lot of information. So, I think I would encourage you to pick up the phone and call. It can be kind of tough to navigate a college website to find a particular person, but just dialing the main line and saying, I need to talk to somebody in EOPS, or I need to talk to your foster youth contact. That would be my first step, and I would encourage you guys to do that, to very quickly and easily, get in touch with the right person, and then work on developing relationships with them, because what you may see on a website in terms of particular steps or timeframes, developing that relationship, it'll get you access and get you in contact with people who know some shortcuts, or know somebody who knows somebody that can get a student coded in a few hours and can clear up issues. So I think the relationships are really important, and I would encourage you to not be afraid to call in and just ask around until you get the right person that can help you out.
And things can change, especially in the remediation, the assessment and remediation side of the house these days is changing fairly quickly. So you want to have that connection so you can be up to speed. And websites don't change as fast as things change on campus in a lot of cases.
Absolutely. Right.
Nobody has the budget to run these. We have great corporate websites, so they're not always the easiest. Any questions? I don't see any posted questions. Anybody want to raise your hand, please? We'd love to hear from you. What can you share from your experience? If you raise your hand, I can unmute you. We can talk about anything now the rest of the time. If you want to say anything about matriculation, any other topic, ask the challenge. Questions are fine. I think one thing I'd like to ask about, Aaron, because I've had this question, is tutoring and what is available, and whether, say, particularly because you're a NextUp Counselor and you've got the state NextUp program, is there special tutoring that comes with the NextUp program, or is it just the tutoring that's available on campus for any student?
Just like we're talking about, it's going to vary per program and per campus. My NextUp program, we hired some tutors just for our foster youth for the 15-16 academic year, and then we moved over to just collaborating with our tutorial center. Every campus will have a tutorial center. It's free to students. And again, getting connected to EOPS, we make referrals all the time to the tutorial center. It's tough. I don't know if students are ashamed or if they just don't know about it or what, but it's really hard to get in at the first time. So maybe having some conversations with your students their senior year, it's, you know, in a way, it's kind of like, it's such a huge advantage to be able to sit down with another student who's already passed the class that you're trying to take if it's a transfer level English. And it just surprises me that more students don't take advantage of it, because it's the easiest way to be able to get help to pass a class. If you're not a good test taker, you can supplement your grade by working with a tutor to turn in, you know, really good papers or complete other assignments. So yeah, every campus has one. They do a lot of outreach, and it's probably, you know, other than EOPS or NextUp, it's probably the one of the most important support services that a student could take advantage of while they're on a college campus.
Mm-hmm. Great. I'm going to add this because this is one of my check boxes, especially the high school counselors that might know the students, where the students have more of a connection than when they get to the college. Everything's new and strange. Everybody's new and strange. Encourage them, in addition to using tutoring and just finding out what's available for them there and how it can help them, but also to visit their professors very soon in the semester. Get over their so that they can get past their, you know, self-consciousness or, you know, uncertainty about talking to them, and go to their office hour, make a connection so that they really get comfortable asking questions in class, but also going to their office hour and getting one-on-one help. The best person in the world to help you succeed in your class is your professor. And like you just said, Aaron, it's so hard to understand why students don't take more advantage of tutoring. Everyone I know who teaches in college and university can't figure out why students don't come to their office hours and ask for help, you know. So it's maybe helpful for the high school counselors and all to just kind of mention that to students, like make that a priority in the first 3 weeks of the semester. So we got a question
it's
for
so
Chris.
Important that,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, It's so important that we do a progress monitoring, and I make all of our NextUp students take a progress report to their instructor during their office hours to sit down and ask them how they're doing in the class and to get their official grade. And knowing the grade is one thing, but the more important part is the student gets to use that as a tool. Hey, my counselor is making me fill this out, but at least that gets them in the door and talking to their professors and instructors, which is absolutely critical also to being successful in classes.
Yeah, I'm actually working in our program with our housing providers for college transition and success, and we're working up a case management checklist that includes what I was saying. Make sure that, you know, just ask the student, have you been to see your professor, and make that a goal for within the first 3 weeks of the classes. So I have to tell you, when I got the EOPS course, a student evaluation, and they were asking for grades, often it was too late, or it was later than would have been good for the student. So having that relationship and that ease of asking questions early on, it's really important, because you don't want to wait till the first test before you find out you're not really getting it. So a question about, can you help Aaron answer the question, where does the student get awarded the support letter?
Yeah, so the Department of Social Services, you can call their ILP, the Independent Living Program office. Oftentimes they will do the award of the court letter. The student's social worker should be able to get the award of the court letter. Anybody at Department of Social Services, but I would probably start with the social worker first, and if you can't get it that way, or maybe the student isn't in care anymore, then you can contact the ILP office. Department of Social Services, each of your county's offices, they have access to the state database, so they should be able to pull up a student's case. Let's say you're in Alameda County, but you know, the student, their case was open in Fresno County. Alameda County Department of Social Services should be able to open up the Fresno County case and look at the start and end dates. There are some exceptions, But if all of those options fail, the California Department of Social Services has an ombudsman's, I can never say that word, office, and the student can call them and request a word of the court letter, and they will look in their state database and do a word of the court letter that way as well. So you've got a couple different options there to get one. But I would start with the social worker if the student currently has one and go from there.
Yeah, and to clarify, if the student is still in foster care, then the letter has to come from the social worker or the ILP. And if they're not still in care, then the ombudsman can provide the letter, and the request has to come from the youth. It cannot come from, a school personnel. But the ombudsman, and I have to say, I was in a meeting recently with Sade Daniels from the ombudsman's office in Sacramento. She's awesome, and I mean, just amazing, her commitment and follow through. And so if a student is saying they don't know who their social worker is, or they're not even sure where they were in care, then call the ombudsman's office and they'll trace it down and help the student figure out who it is that they need to talk to. I feel very confident about that now that I've met Sade and heard some of the stories she told. So even if they're still a foster youth, they may not be able to provide the word of court letter, but they can make sure they know who to go to. But yeah, the social worker first, ILP. And also, the legislation, the SB 12 bill that we got passed last year, allows for automatic verification of foster youth status between the Department of Social Services and CSAC. Okay, so that means that for financial aid purposes, there's going to be an automatic verification process. But to Aaron's point, that doesn't mean that Admissions and Records is going to get that verification of foster youth status. So they're going to need that word of court letter for the priority registration and possibly other support available on campus that require that they be verified as a current or former foster youth. Anything else to add there, Aaron?
One quick thought, social worker or probation officer, because they may have dependency on the probation side, and they're still eligible for everything that dependency on the social services side would be eligible for. So maybe a social worker or a probation officer, but I just wanted to bring that up as well.
Yeah, good. Yes, and it does, but they do have to have a court dependency that is verified in the letter if they are in probation. Probation can get a little sticky, right? Because it can be kind of a different status for some students who are in probation.
Right.
And they think they're foster because they're not in their home, but they're not actually under a ward of the court status, correct?
Correct. I don't see it that often, but there's a small percentage of foster youth who have dependency open on the probation side rather than on the social services side. So it's not going to occur that frequently, but it is just important to know for when it does come up, if the student mentions the probation officer to see if it's with dependency, to get the word of the court letter from that side.
Okay. Thanks. Anything else? Anybody last chance? We're kind of at our 11 o'clock hour, so is that all your questions? Don't be shy. No raised hands. Well, I hope this has been really helpful. Aaron, it's just great to have you on the call. I learned several really critical things this morning, so I can help continue to spread the news. And it's really great that you're here, and appreciate you taking your personal time to do this. It will spread far and wide, so thank you. And thank you all for being here. Thank you all for the work that you're doing. And I will talk with you and see you soon. Great. Have a great day.
Thanks, Deborah. All right, take care. Bye.